Hare Krishna, Om Ajnana Timirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Vanchakalpatribhyascha Kripa Sindhu Eva Chapati Tanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Well, I've received a flurry of questions and messages from students and friends about the video that Sivarama Swami released on the 9th of January, expressing his opinion that women should not initiate. And subsequently, Hridayananda Maharaj responded to that video on the 14th of January. So I thought that two things. One, that I would make one video to respond to some of the questions I received, but primarily I want this video to be a documentation of the history. It's not found anywhere else in one place, at least not that I'm aware of. So I've gathered the history here, and I will be including links to documents and minutes and all kinds of information to share with everyone so that we have access to this. I think it's important that we know the history and understand what has been going on for the last 26 years. So, to start with, Sarah, yes, I think an actual debate between the two would be very interesting, and perhaps there would be some caution with regard to use of rhetoric if that were to happen. Jules, good to hear from you. We should connect soon. So you ask if he's blocking the seva of some of his senior god sisters. Yes, among the qualified Vaishnavis, there are at least one or two that is his senior. And you wonder if that means that Vaishnava etiquette is not being followed for the Vaishnavis. I don't think that applies here, although yes, we see on occasion that Vaishnava etiquette doesn't often apply to Vaishnavis. But I think more, maybe we could consider that Madhyama Bhakta will view others in regard to how they see them. So with the Lord, they offer their love. With those who are their superiors, they offer respects and obeisances. To their peers, they are friendly. And with innocent people, they are merciful. And with the ignorant or opposed to bhakti, they ignore them or reject them. So it perhaps could fall under that category, how Maharaj is looking at his Vaishnavi god sisters. That said, one does need to make a judgment, so evidently there's some judgment being made that Vaishnavis, even the senior ones, are less than. So that would be interesting to think about that a little deeper, but we'd have to hear from him about how he views that. We don't know. Brian, I hear you when you say you want to run from ISKCON, okay? And you have a question about Apar Sampradaya. So please watch the video by Hridayananda Maharaj. In that video, he offers some good counterpoints on that. But I'll offer something else in this video a little bit later. But I know this triggers you a lot, and you're very disappointed, but I want to say, hang on. We still have the GBC meetings to come to. And something practical we can do is to pray to Narasimhadev. Srila Prabhupada told us to pray to Nrsimha Bhagavan to protect his ISKCON. And we know that Nrsimhadev is a protector of Mahaprabhu's Sankirtan movement, as we hear in the pastime of Chandkazi. So let's pray to Nrsimhadev. We know especially the beautiful stories of the Nrsimha deity in Mayapur. In fact, I should send you that document. I will. And even with contemporary devotees, he has appeared in their dreams and saved them in other ways. So he's active, and maybe we can place our head at his lotus feet and ask him to create a solution where there is cooperation in Prabhupada's movement. Yes, Ranga, I think that Sridharananda Maharaj's salient points did significant to undermine the foundational structure of Sivarama Swami's premises, at least as he had presented them in that video. Yeah, as I said, it would be interesting for them to have an actual debate to see how Maharaj could support his arguments. Jayanti, you ask if Sivarama Swami going public is appreciated. Well, appreciated by who? I'm sure the opposition appreciates it very much, but me, the GBC, Srila Prabhupada, those would be important questions to answer. We know that Prabhupada wanted all of his followers and disciples to follow the GBC, even if we disagreed with them. And he said that the Gaudiya moth failed because they did not cooperatively deal with a governing body or a governing managerial team. So obviously Prabhupada felt strongly about it, and we'd have to hear from the GBC if they appreciate Swami's videos on these matters. But I personally have to wonder, because Maharaj is a influential, prominent leader, sannyasi, and held in great esteem, reasonably so. And he, for many years, was on the GBC, so he was a participant to numerous discussions, all of the resolutions and votes. He knows that every time this came up to the GBC body, it was supported and voted in favor of. So he is well aware of the position of the GBC. So to come out against the GBC would be an interesting question. Is that going against the GBC? I'm sure Maharaj has come up with some perspective on how he's not following the GBC, but that could be a point of discussion. Hi, Michelle. Yes, Sridharananda Maharaj is correct to say that there are Diksha Vaishnavi workarounds happening right now. And these workarounds include prominent Vaishnavas, including two very senior, well-known sannyasis. The devotees in the Western world know that these Vaishnavis, are qualified, and they have people that want Diksha from them. And to deny them that is harming the individuals. And we can see that this position harms the PR of the movement as well. So these are odd circumstances forced by the situation. I hope it doesn't have to continue more. Okay, right, Sharanagati. I'll address your point about not calling Vaishnavis Prabhu in a while, or a bit. Dave, Vijay, Damodar, Melanie, and others, I think your questions will be answered by hearing and learning about the history of this conversation, and it will also answer why it's been going on so long. So today, I have gathered for you and the Vaishnava community the history of this conversation so that we can get a better understanding of what has been happening. The GBC meetings will convene in about 19 days on the 14th of February. And this meeting is going to be significant because the 3-year moratorium on allowing Vaishnavis to offer Diksha has expired a couple of months ago, and therefore the GBC has to take up the topic yet again. Of course, the release of the videos has been timed to influence that meeting. But history shows that this discussion has been thorough, has addressed as best as possible the points of those who are opposed to it, and that every time a vote was called to the GBC floor, it was decided that women can offer Diksha. Why? Because Srila Prabhupada said he wanted his daughters and sons to initiate, and there is nothing in our Bhakti Shastras that prohibit it. Further, there is precedent in our Sampradaya. As you'll see, the discussion is on the GBC agenda again, not because there's ambivalence due to a lack of evidence of the existence of women Diksha gurus in Gaudiya Vaishnavism, or a lack of philosophical grounding within our Sampradaya that supports it, or that Prabhupada didn't support it. Instead, as Sri Dayananda Goswami saliently points out, the GBC has been repeatedly blackmailed by some leaders of the Indian leadership by indicating they would secede from ISKCON if Vaishnavis begin to initiate. The matter has been so divisive that there was weekly hours-long meetings facilitated between October 2020 and March 21 by two professional mediators, one chosen by the GBC and one chosen by the Indian Bureau. The purpose was to thoroughly hear all the concerns of certain members of the Bureau. I'll speak more about this part of the history later. As I was doing research for this video, I came upon meeting minutes by the joint leaders of India, which shows their intentions, and I'll be reading that toward the end, so stay tuned. In summary, blocking women from offering Diksha is a political issue. Those who oppose it would like us to believe there is sound philosophical evidence for their position, lack of precedence and disapproval from Srila Prabhupada, but this is not the case. Now, before I continue with the history, we need to be clear. There are real people, real devotees, sincere devotees like you, who have been waiting many years to receive initiation from their spiritual master. Would you like to wait years to receive Diksha from your precious preceptor who ignited in your heart a connection to Sri Sri Radha and Krishna and gave your life meaning and purpose? I don't think so. These devotees have been brought to bhakti, taught, trained, and inspired in their heart by these Vaishnavis who are, in fact, their guru. We must know this conversation is not abstract. Real people are involved. Your worshipable senior devotees, who were personally trained by Srila Prabhupada, who are pioneers who made many sacrifices in the same ways that their godbrothers did, are the topic of this conversation. They are part of the backbone of ISKCON and have made significant contributions to the spreading of Krishna consciousness around the world. None of our leaders or sannyasis would have the full scope of their sevas without the assistance of these Vaishnavis who stood by them, supported them, and offered them services gladly and humbly. I offer that you may not want to be too quick to dismiss them who have participated in making the facilities to give your gurus their sacred, beautiful sevas. Each one of them is glorious and deserves our respect. They deserve the respect of everyone, whether sannyasis, brahmacharis, brahmacharinis, or grihastas. I have personally known these devotees for 50 years. They aren't ordinary souls. In Bombay in 1974, Prabhupada said, "These women are not ordinary women. They are preachers. They are preachers. They are Vaishnava. By their association, one becomes a Vaishnava." And who makes a Vaishnava is Guru. And many Vaishnavis are making devotees, and those devotees want Diksha from them. Inadvertently or unknowingly, those who object are denying the spiritual connection between Guru and Shishya in the transcendental system. Let's also be clear that if the opposing arguments were actually strong or conclusive, this conversation would not have continued for over 20 years. Okay, now we're going into the year 2000, when a delegation of 8 of our senior-most Vaishnavis made a presentation to the GBC about the treatment of women in ISKCON that had gone on for decades. The generosity of the Vaishnavis to serve happily and humbly has not always been reciprocated, and it was rightly and maturely expressed in 2000 along with many other points. The devotees' poignant presentations prompted several resolutions and an apology from the GBC. Let me read an excerpt from that year. Whereas the Women's Ministry presentation on March 1st, 2000 to the GBC body brought a clearer understanding of the mistakes of the past and the need to provide equal and full opportunity for devotional service for all devotees in ISKCON, regardless of gender, and then it goes on. I'm sharing a link to all the GBC resolutions about Vaishnavis from 2000 onward, as well as the link to find these online at the GBC site. This interesting document shows that over the past 25 years, the majority of opinion is in support of Vaishnavis offering Diksha. I'm also including a link to the book, The Emergence of Women's Voices in ISKCON, where all the papers of that delegation in 2000 are published, and they're beautiful papers. Now we're on to 2003. The next engagement by the GBC was that year in 2003. They requested the Shastric Advisory Committee to research the philosophical topic of possible future Vaishnavi Diksha Gurus. Their paper was authored by Suhotra Swami, Gopi Pranadana Das, Drudakarma Das, Purnachandra Das, Devamrita Das, now Swami, and presented to the GBC at their 2005 meeting. And as usual, there's a link in the description below. They exhaustively examined Prabhupada's statements and Shastric quotes. They found ample evidence for Prabhupada wanting his daughters to initiate, and no direct statement saying that Vaishnavis could not initiate. Further, they documented the history of a number of Vaishnavis in the Gaudiya Sampradaya who gave Diksha to men and women. And they wrote, let me read that. Weighing the philosophical evidence, the SAC team, which stands for the Shastric Advisory Committee, concludes that female devotees, if qualified, should be allowed to give initiation in ISKCON. It seems unsupportable on the basis of Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra to have a policy that asserts that there can never be female gurus in ISKCON. In response, the GBC issued a resolution stating, the GBC accepts the philosophical conclusion presented in the SAC's Female Diksha Guru paper that a mature, qualified female devotee may accept the role of an initiating spiritual master. The SAC's paper was thorough, objective, strong, and included the participation and opinion of a member of the Indian contingency. That's why the GBC took the decision it did. No need to take my word on it, read it in the document. Now, between 2005, we don't find anything on the GBC books. During these years, we heard much about the conversations Bashu Ghosh, Bhaktivikas Swami, and others were having with Indian leaders, trying to gain their support for their agenda. And their agenda is well documented with the leaked release into the public of their conversations on the private PAMHO conference GHQ. GHQ stands for General Headquarters and was established with the specific aim of dismantling the Vaishnavi ministry. In their conference, they discredited their senior Vaishnavi god sisters, such as Yamuna Prabhu, Vishaka Prabhu, Sudharma Prabhu, and others. In 2009, the GBC, taking into account the objections over these years, resolved that the GBC body authorizes local area committees to put forward for approval as initiating guru any devotee in their area, male or female, who is qualified according to GBC law. But this was blocked. Now, at this point, there were qualified Vaishnavis who had waited 10 years for the matter to be settled. And it needs to be noted that all the Vaishnavis have remained patient and respectful, and they continued to wait at this point for another 4 years until the GBC took up the matter again in 2013. From 2009 to 2013, the devotees continued to lobby against the GBC decisions and portrayed Vaishnavis in negative light, limiting them by their material designation of their body. And from the opposition, we've heard the Vaishnavis called quite a lot of choice names and offensive epithets. In 2013, the GBC decided to postpone a vote on the topic until the 2014 midterm meeting in Tirupati. And to prepare for that, the GBC formed a committee to do further research on the topic. The committee consisted of Bir Krishnadas Goswami as the convener, Bhanu Swami, Badri Narayan Das, now Swami, and Pragosh Das. Ultimately, the paper was prepared by a team of devotees in Chopati. They were given the, quote, responsibility to base their research on Srila Prabhupada's teachings, Shastra, and historical precedents, end quote. And they were further asked to clearly establish support or denial of women offering Diksha. The GBC was explicit about the nature and details of their mandate as seen in 321 in 2013. The details show the scope of the research and that they needed to verify their authenticity. In other words, this was a thorough, impressive attempt to end the debate. And I'll share a link to that document, which was nearly 1,000 pages that were presented to the GBC, held in Tirupati exclusively to address this topic. And there's an article about that meeting, which I will put the link below too. We can note that the GBC has taken every precaution and has tried to satisfy the upset of some of the Indian leaders. I spoke with several attendees right after this meeting. They informed me that the majority of devotees present favored allowing Vaishnavis to offer Diksha, and that seeing this majority, one prominent leader, sannyasi, was so distraught about the idea of his god sisters offering Diksha that he broke down in tears. I was also told that Sivarama Swami said in that meeting that Srila Prabhupada had said Vaishnavis can initiate, but not so many. Therefore, a day was spent speaking about the qualifications and restrictions for Vaishnavis based on Maharaj's input. Though Maharaj acknowledged the fact of Prabhupada's support for Vaishnavi Diksha Gurus, unfortunately at the next meeting Sivarama Swami had changed his mind and was now opposed to Vaishnavis initiating. No vote was taken at the 2014 meeting in Tirupati as the GBC had committed to do because of continued concerns about the actions certain devotees in India would take. No matter the extent of evidence, historical precedent, logic, reasoning, proof of the way this is hampering ISKCON's preaching in the West, and years of open, dedicated conversation could not address the political and emotional agendas. That's because they are political and emotional. Now, from 2014 to 2018, there was much back and forth discussions between the GBC and the ISKCON Society members. Discussions included the necessity for allowing Vaishnavas to initiate, to facilitate Western preaching. Most devotees preaching to Western audience have experience of the negative impact on spreading Krishna consciousness there is by obstructing the seva of Vaishnavis. But the heat of threats from some Indian leaders continued, and in 2018, the GBC committed to meet every year about the subject until it was resolved, noting, and I quote, "Whereas there is a critical need for many more devotees to serve as Diksha Guru in ISKCON, whereas there are at least 9 million congregational members in ISKCON, whereas ISKCON has less than 80 devotees available to give Diksha to potentially 9 million congregational members in ISKCON, whereas if every congregational member sought initiation, each guru would have to accept approximately 112,500 disciples." A year later, in 2019, the GBC resolves, and again I quote, "Whereas, after much study, dialogue, and research, the GBC has come to the following conclusion. Resolved, 1. Vaishnavis are eligible to give Diksha in ISKCON provided that they A. meet all the qualifications listed for ISKCON Diksha Guru applicants, B. are at least 55 years of age and in a stable family situation living under the protection of a husband, elder son, or son-in-law, qualified household or couple, or senior Vaishnava or Vaishnavi Sangha. C. Receive written permission from the appropriate regional body or its equivalent, or national council to give Diksha in that particular part of the world. So of course now we're seeing that they're adding stipulations. It's not just that they can, now they have to meet other stipulations, qualifications that aren't the case for male gurus. They go on to say, the primary basis for the decision are expressed desires and instructions on guru qualifications of ISKCON's founder Acharya, His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. This resolution concludes over 15 years of the GBC's thorough research and in-depth discussion of the letter and spirit of Prabhupada's numerous instructions on the subject of the importance and qualifications of various types of spiritual masters for ISKCON as a worldwide movement. Srila Prabhupada's expressed desire that all his, quote, sons and daughters become spiritual masters. Srila Prabhupada's well-documented personal dealings with and engagement of his female disciples in various roles of spiritual responsibility. Srila Prabhupada's approach to the balance between spiritual and societal roles of Vaishnavas and Vaishnavis in the context of pure devotional service, and, as appropriate, the broader historical and shastric evidence in regards to Diksha in Lord Chaitanya's Gaudiya Vaishnava Sampradaya, end quote. The Vaishnavi ministry further issued a statement in December 2019, and I'll include the link below. A short paragraph of that letter reads, quote, ISKCON is an international organization facing cultural variations in different regions of the world. If we are going to be an effective, unified society, we have to be sensitive to cultural variations. It would be tragic if ISKCON is reduced to an ethnic Indian religion in Western countries. And while there is no philosophical bar to having Vaishnavis giving initiation, some communities may not be ready to accommodate this practice, end quote. But the dissension continued. Two leaders of the Indian Bureau wouldn't hear of it, saying that the GBC hadn't heard sufficiently from the Indian leaders. Therefore, the GBC put the matter on hold again. Then, presumably to quell the unrest in India and avoid some of the Indian leaders splitting from Srila Prabhupada's movement, Jayapataka Maharaj, Bhakti Charu Swami, and Gopal Krishna Maharaj, preeminent respected leaders in India, released a video in June 2020 stating why they supported Vaishnavis initiating. Are their disciples following their gurus on this matter? If not, what is the nature of your relationship with your spiritual master? Do you know more than your guru? As always, I include a link to their video below. Unfortunately, their video was followed in short order by a video published by Sivarama Swami in October 2020, opposing their views and the GBC resolutions. Also, unfortunately, this further sowed discord and fueled the opposition. And I will include, as I do with everything, a link below. There are many things that could be addressed in Maharaj's video, but I'd like you to take special note at 35 minutes 54 seconds in the video, where he states that men can be Diksha gurus while in sadhana bhakti, but women have to have achieved bhava or prema bhakti. This begs the question, so the increased influence of bhakti from nishta to ruchi to asakti to bhava is different in the chitta of a soul residing in a woman's body and that of a man's body? Of course, my question is rhetorical. During the heat of all these goings on in 2020, as noted in the ISKCON News, and I quote, the GBC established a committee of 4 members to dialogue with and hear from 4 representatives of the Indian Bureau from approximately October 2020 to May 2021. This group met weekly for 1 to 2 hours so that the GBC could better understand the views of leaders in ISKCON India. The dialogues were coordinated by 2 professional facilitators, 1 from ISKCON Resolve and 1 selected by the India Bureau. After months of dialogue and hearing extensively from the Bureau representatives, the GBC team reported back to the GBC body and a modified proposal was considered. In that decision, the GBC invoked a recent resolution that allows a GBC decision to be designated as culturally sensitive resolution that is not necessarily appropriate for everyone's region. In this case, if India or another region of the world chooses not to allow Vaishnavi Diksha Gurus, they are free to do so. That GBC decision, which upheld the endorsement of Vaishnavi Diksha Gurus under specific conditions, was passed by a vote of 19 to 8, 19 in favor, 2 opposed, and 8 abstentions, end quote. So again, we had a majority vote in the GBC in favor of Vaishnavis initiated after protracted discussions with Indian leaders. In 2022, with GBC approval, Narayani Dasi initiated her first disciple. This inflamed the opposition and heats things up. And there's a link to the ISKCON news article about this below. But now, reaching for another excuse to prohibit the Vaishnavis, the Indian leaders argued that ISKCON was to establish Varnashram, and having Vaishnavis initiate would be detrimental to establishing it. Evidently, nearly 20 years of discussion wasn't enough for them. Why? Because the majority of devotees disagreed with them. In 2022, the Indian Continental Committee, ICC, the ISKCON India Advisory Committee, IIAC, and the later the Indian Bureau, IB, each passed resolutions stating their continued objections to Vaishnavi Diksha Gurus. The IIC requested the Bureau to endorse their proposal, including that any female Diksha Guru should not be allowed to give class, darshan, seminars, and that a disciple of any female Diksha Guru not be engaged in temple services. They said that GBC had erred and requested a moratorium be placed on Vaishnavis initiating. The veiled threats of seceding remained on the table. Therefore, again, in respect of the Indian leadership, a moratorium was placed on the matter. Also, in 2022, the Sabha, which stands for Spiritual Advisors Bhagavat Assembly, was asked by the GBC to perform a review of the GBC and Indian Bureau dialogue. The full results of that review can be seen in the link below. They begin their review with this. Sabha has supported Vaishnavi Diksha Guru law by vote in its favor every time it has come to Sabha review stage. Sabha supports dialogue between the GBC and IB as a sign of appreciation and respect for the Indian leadership. Sabha supports this resolution, and that refers to everything below this statement in that document, which you'll find in the description. Provided that 1, the dialogue is restricted to 90 days and is focused on how India can proceed or opt out with Vaishnava Diksha Guru standing as ISKCON law, and 2, the hold on other Vaishnava Diksha Guru initiation is restricted to 90 days. And they state the majority of the delegates from the Bureau and GBC agreed that Vaishnavi Diksha Guru is in our tradition, though somewhat rare. So here we have a statement that both parties agree that although rare, women can initiate, and the Sabha is clearly tired by saying we can't just let this go on, we need to limit this to 90 days. But it wasn't limited to 90 days. At this time, the GBC invites the India Bureau leaders to meet with them again, and they explain that India isn't mandated to allow Vaishnavis to initiate there. In other words, Indian leaders can have ISKCON on their continent the way they want it, and other ISKCON centers in the West who face the daunting task of trying to include Westerners into Bhakti's fold are also free to reach this distinctive audience. What could be more amiable? What else can the GBC do to bring cooperation? For those who are interested, I'll share a link below to Sabha's founding document, which says that their purposes say that the Sabha will provide checks and balances on the authority of the GBC, will offer the GBC opportunity to hear from other qualified Vaishnavas, will suggest issues for discussion at the GBC. Overall, the Sabha collaboratively will work with the GBC by reviewing and proposing legislation and by suggesting topics for discussion with the aim of improving the quality, legitimacy, and acceptance of GBC resolutions, priorities, and directions. And from the initiating document, we learned that, and this is important because this gives them credence, the Sabha shall have 35 members subdivided into the following categories. 1. Sannyasis, 12 members. Senior devotees, 5 members. Vaishnavis, 5 members. Youth, 3 members. And area representatives, 10 members. In other words, this assembly is comprised of a balance of scholarly devotees who can objectively assist the GBC, with the higher numbers being sannyasis. Therefore, their review has esteemed value. At the 2023 GBC meetings, 5 GBC members were appointed to an Indian Bureau/GBC Relationship Committee. This was to settle the matter during the Moratorium. I couldn't find any documentation of any activity of this relationship committee. If this is true, then by default, the Indian leadership has forfeited the right for further conversation because they had 2 years to present their case. That same year, in 2023, after waiting 23 years for a cooperative agreement, 56 senior Vaishnavis, all disciples of Prabhupada, address all the devotees of our worldwide organization in an open letter to all present and future ISKCON devotees. The link is below. Their voices should not be ignored. Within their plea, they also pose some interesting questions, and I'd like to read a few excerpts from that. Is there perhaps an intention by some to install the empowerment of Vaishnavi Diksha gurus until all of Srila Prabhupada's daughters have passed away, daughter disciples, or until they have all become physically incapable of performing this service? Such a travesty should never occur. Why not allow a few qualified Vaishnavis to initiate a few sincere, deserving disciples? At least a few women disciples. What is the harm? No harm at all, according to Prabhupada and Shastra, and then they give quotes. Some of those who want to stop Prabhupada's women disciples from fulfilling his order are quick to reference sampradayas that forbid women to initiate. Why are we ignoring those that allow them? Some devotees maintain that women may give shiksha or instruction, but not diksha. Yet in his purport to Chaitanya Charitamrita Adi 134, Prabhupada writes, the initiating and instructing spiritual masters are equal and identical manifestations of Krishna, although they have different dealings. And in his purport to Adi 147, His Divine Grace further clarifies, if one foolishly discriminates between them, he commits an offense in the discharge of devotional service. And another statement, the moratorium's proposers claim that its main purpose is to discuss and clarify the issue of Guru Tattva in ISKCON. But if that's true, why not suspend all initiations by both men and women? Why suspend only initiations by women? We welcome the need for cultural sensitivity, as did an overwhelming majority of voting GBCs. But some voices in India, ignoring Srila Prabhupada's call for university in diversity, have refused to respect those areas of the world with preaching needs different from their own. And almost to the end, some people contend that since Srila Prabhupada did not select women to give initiation, so after his departure, neither should we. But neither, for example, did His Divine Grace select any Indian, Chinese, African, or Russian devotees. Does this mean that male devotees from those backgrounds are not eligible to offer Diksha in ISKCON? Of course not. Srila Prabhupada dismissed the bodily conception of life, so why now cling to that same misconception and discriminate against Vaishnavis? This is the end of the excerpts. I want to read. There's much more in that letter, so you can look at that. The moratorium on Vaishnavis not initiating expired a couple of months ago. Therefore, the GBC has to take up the topic again this year, which begins in a couple weeks. It seems that the Indian leaders are prepared. In my research, I found the following meeting minutes from a joint meeting of the Indian leadership, which appears will be presented to the GBC at the upcoming meeting. Before reading it, though, I'd like to bring your attention to a couple of things. First, when the discussion initially began, there were a couple of leaders on the Indian Bureau who objected. A few years later, some managers on the Indian Continental Committee, ICC, the ISKCON Indian Advisory Committee, IIAC, voiced their objection. And as I mentioned, a couple of leaders have spent years lobbying the Indian leaders to come to their point of view. Now you're going to see in these meeting minutes, we have leaders from more bodies joining with the same intention to disobey the GBC and threaten a schism. Let's hear it. I'll make some comments in between the minutes. Whereas in the joint meeting of the Bureau and ISKCON India leaders, IBAC, ICC, EC, DC, ECs, RSAs, and others in attendance, the issue of female Diksha Gurus was discussed at length. Whereas it was decided by consensus that the issue of female Diksha Gurus ought not to be decided by the majority vote of the GBC, but that in view of compelling evidence from Vedic Shastras, Srila Prabhupada's purports and Srila Prabhupada's actions during his lifetime, the issue should be decided by ongoing dialogue without time limit between representatives of ISKCON India and the GBC. Now, before I read further, we must take clear note that as a group, they have stated that they will not abide by the majority vote of the GBC. Of course, this has been their behavior all along, but here we have written evidence of their intention to disobey the guidelines Srila Prabhupada established for his society. And further, that there is no end to the conversation until, of course, they get their way. Okay, I'm going to read on. Whereas, should the present system of initiation continue as it is till the issue is mutually resolved, it will not in a drastic way change or affect the spiritual well-being of the devotees. Now, it's interesting that these devotees who are not preaching in the West, don't have experience, think that there's no spiritual harm being done to hundreds of people here in the West. I speak with individuals here in North America and elsewhere in the West on a daily basis. I and many other preachers have first-hand experience that the devotional creeper of people here are being harmed. Though they have no experience, somehow the Indian leaders know better than the devotees who have experience. What does this mean? It means they think they are better and smarter than devotees, many of whom are their seniors with more experience in preaching. They continue. Whereas this issue is too important for it to be adopted without a consensus among all parties, since it pertains to the well-being and unity of Srila Prabhupada's mission affecting millions of devotees around the world, therefore ISKCON India strongly suggests that the GBC extend the dialogue on the topic until such time as a consensus on the issue is worked out. We apprehend that if such a consensus is not reached, and if system of female Diksha Guru is imposed on ISKCON, it will bring about a schism in the society and further deteriorate relations between the GBC and the ISKCON India leadership. The leaders of ISKCON strongly suggest that the GBC not institute female Diksha Gurus in the interim, keeping their resolution in this regard on hold, and extend the present moratorium. Their threats are not veiled. Then, at the end of their minutes, we have this. ISKCON India leadership expresses its gratitude to ISKCON, devotee Matajis who served selflessly for decades, dedicating their life to ISKCON and the mission of Srila Prabhupada. As a token of appreciation, ISKCON India hereby commits to raising US $1 million to be dedicated for taking care of senior retired Matajis to live a dignified life either in India or abroad. Details of this will be worked out later. End of the minutes. So now, in addition to the blackmailing and threats, we have a bribe to the GBC, which isn't quite finalized, so it's a post-dated check of a bribe. Since this kind of unethical behavior seems to be the norm among some of these members, I have to wonder the nature of the relationships there. What level of trust exists in these groups? How many leaders are being quiet and going along because if they spoke up it would risk their services? What else is going on behind the scenes? It's not generally the case that a person will behave inappropriately in one area and not in another. Well, anyway, that's off the topic, so let's get back on track. I'd like to point out that the ISKCON India Advisory Committee, IIAC, and the Indian Bureau referred to the discussion about Prabhupada's daughters as female Diksha gurus, while the GBC calls the discussion Vaishnavi Diksha gurus. The distinction made is obvious, though subtle. Referring to Vaishnavis as female, we demote them to the platform of their body, ignoring their standing as devotees of Krishna. And though this is subtle, it's an important, necessary distinction for those who are opposed to Vaishnavi Diksha gurus. Another way this subtle innuendo has been promoted is by outlawing the use of Prabhu to refer to a Vaishnavi. We have literally been mandated not to call women Prabhu. Presumably, even a woman cannot call her god sister Prabhu. Sivarama Swami gave a class about 10 years ago saying that Vaishnavis were never called Prabhu, and he has forbidden his disciples to ever call a Vaishnavi Prabhu. And I'm including, obviously, a link to his class below. You can listen to that yourself. I'm sure Sivarama Swami truly doesn't remember women being called Prabhu. It's not a subject he would have necessarily paid attention to. He has been respected properly in the stages of his devotional development. But Maharaja's claim has been questioned. Vaishnavis who were serving at the temple where he joined distinctly remember that all devotees, men and women, were called Prabhu. And to say that hundreds of devotees have a faulty memory, or they've made it up, and then just dismiss them without actually speaking with them, appears odd and lacking due diligence. I think when we say someone is, or many people are, making up something, we might be calling them, well, liars. Calling each other Prabhu was established by Prabhupada when he was asked about calling him Prabhupada instead of Swamiji. Swamiji replied that the title Prabhupada was more respectful and the devotees should call each other Prabhu, those devotees who sit at the feet of the great Prabhu, Prabhupada. Vaishnavas and Vaishnavis sit at those lotus feet, and we called each other by that title. Srila Prabhupada called his female disciples Prabhu on occasion, as we hear from first-hand testimony from our god sisters and god brothers, and in writing in Srila Prabhupada's letters. Sitala Prabhu relates how the calling of men and women Prabhus was so prominent that one shopkeeper in Vrindavan asked her why ISKCON devotees did this. Sitala explained that Prabhupada instructed us to address each other with this respectful title. And I'll share a link below to 2 articles on the topic about calling Vaishnavis Prabhu. I'll add my own testimony. From 1975 to 1989, I served in Los Angeles, Santo Domingo, Puerto Rico, West 55th Street in New York, Berkeley, Girinagri, Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., and San Diego. In all those places, the normal address for men and women was Prabhu. However, I noticed a shift start in the mid-80s when I sometimes was addressed as Mataji, often said, though not always, with a level of disdain, and at the 1984 Mayapur festival, the bathrooms were marked Prabhu and Mataji. I hadn't noticed this on previous visits to the Dham, so this stood out. Calling Vaishnavas Prabhu and Vaishnavis Mataji places men on a spiritual platform and women on a bodily platform. By doing this, we successfully set the stage for denying Vaishnavis seva as devotees because, after all, they're just women and women are inferior. I'm familiar with most of the opposing arguments about the use of the word for Vaishnavis, one of them being that it's not proper Sanskrit. But if that's really such a sensitive issue, which it was not in the early days of the movement, then we can respectfully call our God sisters Prabhu. Is there a reason not to give them the respect of Prabhu? The dismissiveness of not calling Vaishnavis Prabhu or Prabhu lies at the underbelly of the Vaishnavi Diksha Guru topic. For some people, Vaishnavis must be seen as women, and women are less than. We want them as less than ourselves. We need them to be less than ourselves. And here, I believe, we come to another issue. We can't find the ability to acknowledge and honor Vaishnavis as our elders when they are senior than us and peers when they are our equals. Earlier, I gave evidence for the topic being political and emotional. Now I submit this as other emotional reason for prohibiting Vaishnavis from offering certain services. Emotions don't answer to logic, evidence, conversation, or anything else. They are biases that can only respond to self-reflection, simplicity, and deep honesty and humility. This is the reason why we've been wrangling with one made-up excuse after another, which has largely been defeated by Shastra and precedent multiple times. To say, for instance, that India doesn't accept female gurus is to conveniently ignore the long list of them in India. Indians also accept women in political leadership. And if we mean within Gaudiya Vaishnavism, then we don't have to look far. Most of us have heard of Janava Thakurani, Hemlata Thakurani, Gangamata Goswamini, Ganga Devi, the sisters Krishna Priya and Vishnu Priya, who received the Govardhan Shila of Raghunath Das Goswami from Mukunda, the disciple of Krishna Das Kaviraj Goswami, Pishima Goswamini, not Prabhupada's sister, Ma Yashoda, who was initiated by Bala Krishna Goswami of the Radharaman family in Vrindavan and initiated Richard Nixon as Krishnadas, and a few more. Guru Mata Srimati Jayashree Devi Goswamini was appointed by her guru, Srila Prabhuji, to continue his mission of preserving and propagating the messages and teachings of Srila Rupa Goswami and Srila Raghunath Das Goswami and the lineage of spiritual masters in their disciplic succession. Srila Prabhuji was a disciple of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, and we know that we can expect the highest standards in Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's mission, since he was such an unwavering lion guru. In this picture, we have her surrounded by sannyasis and brahmacharis from Gaudiya Vedanta Samhiti, Sri Gopinath Gaudiya Math, Sri Chaitanya Gaudiya Math, all respectfully honoring her a Vaishnavi Diksha Guru. How beautiful to see the shared Vaishnava respect, humility, and support between these members. And I'll also include a link to the lineages of Gadadhar Pandit and Nityananda Mahajan, who have a number of Vaishnavi Diksha Gurus. There are 5 Vaishnavi acaryas in Gadadhar Pandit's line and 8 in Lord Nityananda's line. Further, I'll include a link to a PDF showing the numbers of Vaishnavis who were Diksha Gurus in 7 other lineages from Mahaprabhu. In those lineages, there's a total of 62 men and 27 women. That makes 30% of women out of the total of 89 gurus in those lines. This should give us an idea of the general pattern one will find throughout the Gaudiya lineages. In this way, a claim that ISKCON would become an Apasampradaya fails in the light of the presence of many Vaishnavi Diksha gurus in Gaudiya Vaishnavism. We can't ignore that it's a common practice within Gaudiya lineages for women to initiate. Krishna Maharaj, I offer you my obeisance. I hope you will receive and welcome my message. You're a highly respected leader who has the attention of thousands of devotees. You are also among the 1 or 2% of devotees who know just how volatile this topic is, how close we are to a split of our Srila Prabhupada's ISKCON, and how likely it is that this could actually happen right now. Also, as a participant of the GBC during all the years that discussions, extensive research, and votes have taken place, you're fully aware that the majority of our leaders, some of the best of whom are on the GBC, favor allowing our God sisters to initiate those who have accepted them as their gurus. I petition you to think a little more about the video you released on 9th January and consider the consequences. This is perhaps the tensest moment in the history of these discussions. The GBC has done absolutely everything it can to concede and cooperate with the Indian leaders, as shown in this video that shares the history. The two parties are at a stalemate. This isn't a benign stalemate, but one with potential to rupture. Your video inflames the current situation with inaccurate rhetoric about ISKCON becoming an Apasampradaya. You stated this without proper support. We're well aware this can only create absolute fear. But this fear is unfounded. You know that there are many, many Vaishnavi Diksha gurus within the Gaudiya Sampradaya's various lineages. Therefore, we can't say we only have Srimati Janava Thakurani's example that we can't follow because she's an eternal associate. In this video I've created, I share information about all these Vaishnavis. You must be familiar with them because these facts have been presented to the GBC. So I have to ask, why do you withhold this information which proves that we don't become an Apasampradaya by including Vaishnavis in our fold in this manner? If a contingency of ISKCON Indian temples secede from the broader ISKCON, you will have some responsibility and not a small one. This will be very unfavorable for Raganuga Bhakti meditation and progress. You're entitled to your opinion, but please, please issue a video saying that you will obey the GBC as Srila Prabhupada asked us to do. Please ask the Indian leaders to similarly obey the GBC. Please, please ask the Indian leaders not to secede from ISKCON. Obeying the GBC, as you know, doesn't mean that you will have to allow your God sisters to initiate in your area, and that there is no mandate for the managers of ISKCON India to allow this either. I hope we hear from you well before the GBC meetings commence on the 4th of February. Thank you for listening. Hare Krishna. I request the GBC not to add a new moratorium. The current moratorium is over. We have patiently waited for 3 years in respect of the Indian leaders. By arguing that Vaishnavis are their bodies, we are covering Bhakti Devi with karma and jnana, which Srila Rupa Goswami clearly indicated created mixed, impure bhakti. Also, as I stated before, in 2023, there was a group convened But the Indian leaders did not take advantage of those 2 years to sort through the issue that they wanted to talk about. Thank you very much for listening. Anyone who still has a question knows how to reach me. May Nityananda Ram, who empowered Srila Prabhupada in his broad campaign of indiscriminate mercy and boundless compassion, come to our rescue. Hare Krishna.